All right. Welcome, Master Naturalists, to our TMN Tuesday, our February event. Today we've got a wonderful speaker that we're going to let introduce, and there's the lunch bell here in my small town, signaling that it is noon. We've got a great speaker today who's going to introduce a little bit more to talk about the recertification pin that we have for Master Naturalists this year. Before we get started with our TMN Tuesdays, as always, we like to run through a quick tech check and virtual meeting room etiquette to make sure that everybody's on the same page as we get started with our content. We do have a WebEx help guide on our website if you are still not able to get your WebEx to cooperate as it needs to today. Today's event is being recorded. And we will have the recording up on their website, if not this afternoon, first thing tomorrow. We are using our chat function today to ask questions. Michelle and Hannah and I will be collecting chat questions for Chip throughout his presentation and then having that conversation with him with your questions at the end of today's presentation. To help us as chat moderators, please make sure that your chat comments stay on topic, professional, respectful, the best spelling and grammar and lack of acronyms to be able to make sure that we're asking the question that you intend for us to ask. If you are a Master Naturalist, you can count watching today's presentation live or as a recording for advanced training hours within the calendar year in which it was presented, which is calendar year 2024. Again, if you are new here and you have additional questions about WebEx or need some extra help, check out our TMN Tuesday website. Hannah, will you drop that link in the chat? That's also where we will have our recording of today's presentation after we're done here. We've showed this screen a few times. This is our QR code for a survey that Parks and Wildlife is requesting all of our webinar participants fill out as part of their quest to get feedback on webinar interactions and the use of these types of tools for training. This helps our program maintain our funding source and satisfy those survey requirements. So please take a moment when you get a chance to scan this QR code. Michelle will also drop that link directly in the chat so that we can get this filled out for those who have requested it from us.
And just to follow up on this survey, if you do take it, and we ask that you do, it will ask what county you're in, and just please enter the county that you're viewing from today.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, Michelle, you want to introduce us to our topic today?
Sure. So February 2024, our TMN Tuesday, we to introduce you to and talk about this year's, the species of this year's Texas Master Naturalist recertification pin. In October at our annual meeting, Chip had the honors of introducing for the first time and announcing what our 2024 Master Naturalist recertification pin would be. And it is the Western Diamondback Rattlesnake. And there's no better person that I know of to give us an overview and introduction to the Western Diamondback Rattlesnake than Chip Ruthven. Chip comes to us today. He works with Texas Parks and Wildlife. He is a natural resource specialist and project leader. He's currently at the Matador Wildlife Management Area. But I met Chip and became aware of his work with the Western Diamondback Rattlesnake when he worked at the Chaparral Wildlife Management Area. And I had the pleasure of going out in the field with him and learning about this species myself. So it was a fun, exciting day that day. And I guarantee you're in for a great presentation today with someone who knows so much about this species. So Chip.
All right. Thank you, Michelle. And like I say, I'm up here in the Panhandle, still a little chilly up here. We got about 6-7 inches of snow on Sunday. Much needed moisture for us up here. I know my daughter's down in San Antonio said it's 75 down here while it was snowing. It's snowing up here. But again, I'm a project leader with Parks and Wildlife. I'm up here in the Panhandle, but I spent 8 years down at the Chaparral WMA. And we'll go ahead and get started. Do I need to again share my screen for the slides?
Yes, sir. You should have a share button at the bottom of your WebEx screen.
Okay, well, let me, hold on. It's got me locked up between screens on my computer. See if I can back out of this. I knew something like this would happen.
I have your slides as a failsafe, but I want to make sure that you get a chance to.
Yeah, like I say, I'm having a hard time. I've got my mouse unfortunately clicked into my desktop, and it's only doing it from my desktop. Let me see if I can go back out in the slideshow. Yeah, there it is. Let's see if it'll go now. Let me try from the first slide. Okay, is that good on y'all's end there?
No, sir, not yet. Go to your web on the bottom of your screen. You should see the WebEx icon.
Okay.
And click on that.
WebEx icon. Okay.
And then you're going to click share on the bottom of your WebEx screen.
Well, let me get down to there real quick. I'm still not seeing share down there. Seeing all my slides on here is all I see.
Okay.
Let me,
so have you reopened your WebEx program?
See, I don't know. I may need for y'all to share the screen, share it on your end again. I hate to delay trying to account for my technological inabilities here, but
you had it 3 times in practice, just so everybody knows.
I know.
Chip has done it 3 times already.
Yeah, I know.
What did we mention yesterday about the tech gods?
I know.
Never rely on them.
Yeah. Like I say, I'm not seeing anything here on my. Like I say, I've got it on my screen and it's working fine. Was working fine on my screen, but
okay, I'm happy to share it if you want to just go to that option.
Why don't you go ahead and share, and I guess I'll try and work our way through it.
Okay. Do you see my screen?
I don't know why
the rattlesnake on it?
Yes. Yes. Looks good.
But does Chip see it? Do you see what slide I'm on, Chip?
Yeah, hold on. It's out of this, see if I can get back to. Yes, okay. Let me try it again here and see. It's still not showing anything for y'all, is it?
No, sir, because I've
okay. Yeah,
I'm sharing my screen.
I believe I can see the slides from there. Is that am I moving the slides for y'all?
No, sir.
No. Okay.
Can you see our pin slide?
I'm sorry.
Can you see this? So on my screen, I have on the WebEx app. So close PowerPoint. Go ahead and go ahead and close your PowerPoint program.
Okay, hold on. Let me try it now. Let me try. I may get it here now. Hold on just a second. Let me see here.
Huh? You got it.
I got it now. Okay. Let's see. Share from the beginning.
You got it. Looks great,
got
Chip.
It's good.
Oh, we're good.
Yep.
Good. Yep. Yeah. All right. Now we'll get started. Talking a little about the western diamondback rattlesnakes. One of my favorite species. It is probably one of the what is the most common species of our 8 species of rattlesnake here in Texas. It is the most common species found throughout the state. It's found in most of the ecological regions of the state, with the exception of far east Texas, primarily in the piney woods, parts of the post oak savanna, and there are probably a few pockets up there in the South Plains where it does not occur. But it's pretty much statewide. This is probably the closest range map I can get Historically, they used to go a little farther up the coast. I know they were present on Galveston Island, and they may still be present on Galveston Island, but they're found throughout the state, and most common in the western part of the state, especially the rolling plains, South Texas brush country, and far west Texas, where they tend to be most common. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the research I did on the Chaparral Wildlife Management Area. You can see there at the map, the Chaparral WMA is about 100 miles southwest of San Antonio, in the heart of the South Texas brush country. Most folks think of rattlesnakes. A lot of them think of South Texas because they're extremely common down there. The WMA down there gave us a good opportunity to do a lot of research on them down there in the South Texas plains, just because they are so common. We captured from about 1996 to 2003, just through fortuitous encounters as we're driving out on the roads during daylight hours there on the management area. We'd see a rattlesnake, we'd hop out of the truck, grab our snake tongs, capture the rattlesnake. We'd put the rattlesnake, basically we'd contain them in 5-gallon buckets. We'd put rattlesnake in the bottom of one 5-gallon bucket, put another 5-gallon bucket on top of that to kind of secure the snake in the bucket. So everyone knew at the Chaparral WMA, if you saw two 5-gallon buckets on top of one another, it was probably a rattlesnake in the bottom one, so you need to be careful. Occasion we get a good day. Occasion I'd run out of 5-gallon buckets, and I used to stick them in my toolbox, which got a little, you had to pay attention getting them out of the toolbox because they get up there on the rim of the toolbox, but fortunately never had any issues there. We bring them back to the laboratory building, collect a wide variety of data on there. You can see measuring the one snake there. We had a box with a piece of foam in the bottom. Place a snake on top of that foam, put a clear piece of plexiglass on top of the snake to kind of secure the snake there in that box. And then we could trace the outline with the grease pencil. We take 2 measurements. We take total length, which would be from the tip of the snout all the way to the base of the rattle. And then we do snout vent length, which would be from the tip of the nose down to the vent, which, on a snake like this, it's kind of at the bottom of the end of the, where the tail starts there, where you see the black and white banding is the tail. So it'd be to the base of the tail. We take weight measurements on the snake. We take the width of the rattles, measurements on the snake. You can see that being done with some calipers there. Like I said, we typically confine the snakes in a snake tube like that, where we could safely handle the rattlesnake. Then we'd inject a pit tag into the snake, typically up on the top of the back, right in front of the vent back there toward the tail. We would inject a pit tag, which you can see there on the screen. It's a little magnetic tag that once it was run over with a scanner, it would give a 9-digit code. So basically all of our rattlesnakes out there, basically they had social security numbers out there on the management area. So every time we caught one, we could run that scan over the back of the snake there toward the base of the tail, and we could identify what individual snake it was upon recapturing the snake. Get into a little bit about size. Again, just under 1,000 rattlesnakes that we caught and collected data off of down there at the Chaparral WMA. And you can look here, male snakes, average size was a little bit under 4 feet in length. Maximum size was actually just a little bit over 5 feet in length. Females were smaller than the males, and 61-inch, 5-foot long rattlesnake. That Western Diamondback rattlesnake is a huge Western Diamondback rattlesnake. You'll see lots of reports of snakes exceeding 6 to 7 feet in length. Those are extremely rare. And a 5-foot rattlesnake that's a live length is 5 foot. Once a snake's been killed by someone, all the connective tissue relaxes in the snake. The snake tends to get stretched out. And a 5-foot live rattlesnake can turn into a 6 or 7 foot rattlesnake once it's dead, as everything stretches out. I'm sure a lot of y'all have seen photographs on the internet of people showing big diamondback rattlesnakes. A lot of them happen to be eastern diamondback rattlesnakes, but you'll see western diamondback rattlesnakes. They'll be on the end of a stick or hung over a fence post, and people hang it out toward the camera to make it look exceptionally large. And a lot of times the caption will say a 10-foot diamondback rattlesnake that weighs 98 pounds. That is not correct. Like I say, 5.5 foot live snake is about as big as they get. Anything over that would be extremely unusual. And actually the weight of a big rattlesnake like that, you're still only looking, they only weigh about 6-7 pounds. So the 98 pounds that you see on the internet, that's not even remotely close to what the actual weight is of the snake. One thing I mentioned is you can kind of see it clearly on this picture there in the bottom. You can look there at the rattle on the snake, and a lot of folks believe that you can tell the age of a rattlesnake by the number of rattles or buttons it has on the tail. Now, if a rattlesnake shed its skin only once a year, in theory, that could work. However, rattlesnakes can shed their skin multiple times a year. Each time they shed their skin, they add another rattle or another button to the end of their tail. In a poor year where prey may be scarce, they may only shed once or twice a year, but in a good year, they may shed 3 or 4 times a year. So you really can't tell the age of a snake based on the number of rattles at the end of its tail. Telling males from females, the easiest way to tell a male rattlesnake from a female rattlesnake is to look at the tail, the black and white striped portion of the tail there. Another common name for a western diamondback rattlesnake is called a coon-tailed rattler because of that pattern on the tail. But the reproductive organs of male snakes are actually up in the tail, where the reproductive organs of females are up toward the abdominal cavity. So the tail section of male snakes tends to be exceptionally, is much more longer and thicker around than it is on the female snakes. Female snake, the tail will taper very abruptly at the vent and tends to have a very short, thin tail compared to the longer, thicker tail on a male snake. And into predators, rattlesnakes are formidable critters in themselves, but surprisingly, there's a lot of things out there that like to eat rattlesnakes. Mammals like badgers and bobcats will readily attack and kill and eat rattlesnakes. Raptors like hawks, caracaras are another significant predators on rattlesnakes. Down in South Texas, you have the indigo snake, the Texas indigo snake, which almost specializes in eating other snakes, including western diamondback rattlesnakes. I'm going to get into a little bit more some of the radio telemetry we did on western diamondback rattlesnakes, and we also did radio telemetry on indigo snakes down there at the Chaparral WMA. And I witnessed on several occasions where indigo snakes were in the process of actually eating rattlesnakes. And I'm sure you've seen the cartoon where you've got the stork trying to eat the frog, and the frog's choking on the stork's neck, kind of fighting all the way down. Those rattlesnakes seem to fight all the way down. I encountered an indigo snake one time. He had about 1 foot left of the rattlesnake outside of his mouth, where he'd already swallowed the rest of the snake. That rattlesnake was rattling the whole way down. But there are quite a few animals out there that do predate on rattlesnakes, and rattlesnakes associate indigo snakes, hawks, small mammals, humans as a potential predator. Getting into their diet, most of their diet is primarily warm-blooded organisms. Primarily, they feed on mice, rats, ground squirrels, but they'll also feed on birds, which a lot of folks don't realize. But especially ground-dwelling birds are primarily ground-dwelling birds like quail and meadowlarks. But any bird that makes the mistake of landing within striking distance for rattlesnake, can wind up in a rattlesnake's belly. Some of y'all may be aware of the Rolling Plains Quail Research Ranch, which is a research facility in the southern Rolling Plains, northwest of Abilene. They do a lot of radio telemetry work down there with bobwhite quail. They've recovered several of their radio telemetry quail inside the bellies of western diamondback rattlesnakes. But primarily rodents, small rodents, but also birds as well are their primary diet throughout their range. Looking at the activity patterns of those rattlesnakes down there on the Chaparral WMA. Again, South Texas, fairly warm. We don't get a whole lot of freezing temperatures down there, so the activity is going to be almost virtually year round. You see a few captures in January, not many, but I know a lot of quail hunters that hunt down there in January and February, and they're still encountering western diamondback rattlesnakes while they're out on the range. But you can see as things warm up in the spring, their activity patterns peak around May or so. They tend to drop off in the summer, and a lot of that has to do with excessive heat. Rattlesnakes like it warm, but they don't like it hot. All of our captures are basically done during the daylight hours. And you get up into June, July, it's exceptionally hot in South Texas, and most of their activity switches over to nocturnal activity, or very early in the morning or late in the evening. Going back on the size of the snakes, I mentioned, exceptionally large snake, which are fairly common in South Texas, northern parts of the range, up in, say, the Rolling Plains. You can still get large snakes, but because of our shorter growing season, those really big snakes are a lot less common than they are down in the southern part of the state. Reproduction. Rattlesnakes are ovoviviparous, which means they produce eggs, but the eggs essentially hatch within the abdominal cavity of the snake, and they pass the young out live, giving the appearance that they're bearing live young. But they are ovoviviparous. Most breeding activity, kind of, you'll notice the snakes breeding during the early spring or spring and into early summer. A lot of folks have seen videos of what a lot of folks refer to as rattlesnake combat or the mating dance. When you see those two videos of two, typically usually pretty large rattlesnakes fighting one, they're actually fighting one of those. Those are actually two male rattlesnakes in combat over a female. So you see the two big males will be there pushing each other down, and but pay attention because there's probably a female out there close by concealing herself in the grass or the brush or whatever the case may be. Young are typically born in the late summer and early fall. Here's a picture. We had a female snake that we captured. We put her in the 5-gallon bucket. We were going to work her up the next day. Lifted the top bucket off of the bottom bucket, and one rattlesnake had turned into 14 rattlesnakes overnight. So those young right there are fresh out of the mother rattlesnake, and you can see they're ranging probably anywhere from 8, 9, 10 inches or so in length when they're born, and they'll have the button on them when they're born. They have that original button, and then as they shed, they add rattles or buttons onto the base of their tail each time they shed their skin. And again, South Texas, people see rattlesnakes year round down there. And so people think, well, they don't hibernate in South Texas. Well, most of the snakes down there in South Texas, they do hibernate. Virtually all of the snakes we followed with radio telemetry through the winter actually went into hibernation for some time period, for as short as 51 days. Up to one that almost was underground for 150 days. But they do typically hibernate during the winter. Looking into their hibernacula, they'll use a variety of places to hibernate. mammal burrows such as badgers or coyote dens. They will hibernate in there. In South Texas, down there on the bottom right, you'll see a pack rat midden. And those were heavily used by rattlesnakes as hibernacula. And during the summer, during the day, to get out of the heat during the day, they would typically be down in a pack rat midden. You get up in areas in the central part of the state, northwestern part of the state, where you have a lot of rocky substrate, where you have caverns and crevices. They will tend to use those as hibernacula. And then there on the upper right, you can see they'll actually use man-made structures for hibernacula as well, underneath houses, in barns, underneath farm machinery or in farm machinery. They'll use whatever they can find to hibernate in. Up in more northern parts of the range, where they tend to where they have communal dens in rock crevices or in small caves, they will tend to communally den, where you may have multiple rattlesnakes in one den. Down in South Texas, where they're using those pack rat middens, you probably only have one snake down in a pack rat midden. You may occasionally have two or three, but they don't communally den in South Texas like they do typically in more northern, more colder areas of the state. In addition to that mark recapture program we did down there, we also did a radio telemetry study on western diamondback rattlesnakes to find out movements, activity patterns, etc. There you can see a picture of me back in the day when I looked a lot less like Santa Claus than I do now. But we'd capture a rattlesnake, we'd anesthetize a rattlesnake, and we'd actually perform surgery on the rattlesnake, insert a transmitter into the abdominal cavity. We'd run the antenna up underneath the skin of the rattlesnake, allow the rattlesnake to recover, and then release the rattlesnake and follow that rattlesnake with radio telemetry. Surprisingly, rattlesnakes in South Texas had a very small home range. Males lived within a 54-acre area. Females' home ranges were less than half of that, of only 20 acres. So extremely small home ranges, which really kind of surprised us. We did a similar telemetry study up here at the Matador WMA a few years back. Again, we're in Northwest Texas, rolling plains, where these snakes tend to have communal dens. And home ranges of snakes up here were significantly larger than they were in South Texas. We had home ranges up to 250 acres or more, where those snakes leave their dens, they go to more of a, quote, summer type range, and then they'd migrate back to those communal dens during the winter. Where they're in South Texas, they had their hibernacula, those pack rat middens, fairly high density in South Texas. They had multiple pack rat middens within their home range, and they had their hibernacula to get into during the winter or during the summer to get away from the heat. But very small home ranges for rattlesnakes in South Texas. Showing the example, the blue polygons are two male snakes. The two red polygons are two female snakes. So he's that one male snake up there on the top. He had two females within his home range there. You can see a little bit of overlap on the male home range as well. Here we have rattlesnake number 9. We actually got a lot of data off of him. Rattlesnake number 9 and I have a kind of a love-hate relationship, you might want to call it. We captured him in 2001 and started a radio transmitter in him. The transmitters last about a year or so. The transmitter went offline, but we happened to capture him again in 2003. We could tell who he was by scanning the pit tag that we had him to identify him. Said, okay, this is number 9. He's got a dead radio transmitter inside him. So again, we did surgery, removed the old transmitter, put in a new transmitter. We keep them basically in a laundry, one of those plastic laundry tubs with a lid on it to let them recover for about 24 hours before we release them again. I'd put some water in there for the snake overnight. The next morning, he'd turned over the water bowl and And so I wadded up some paper towels, and I threw the paper towels in there and was mopping up the water, and I was using a snake hook to move that paper towel around that I thought was at a safe distance. A lot of folks, kind of the general rule of thumb is a rattlesnake can strike half its distance. So a 4-foot snake can strike approximately 2 feet. Well, I found out there's always exceptions to that rule. And he actually got a little backing, I guess, against the side of that tub, and he came all the way up that snake hook and caught me in the forearm. So I got to spend a few hours going to the hospital there in Pearsall, and then I got to have a rough ride up to Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio. And fortunately, I only had to take 1 dose of anti-venom, and they cut me loose, and I was back at work the next day. A lot of folks say that rattlesnake bites are extremely painful. In my case, I had very little pain. However, he only got 1 fang in me. It was fairly shallow, just kind of subcutaneously, but you had the red swelling that typically occurs with rattlesnake bites. Once they gave me the anti-venom, the swelling that was going up my arm immediately ceased. Everywhere my arm was red, 2 or 3 days later, it looked like someone had taken a baseball bat to my arm. It was black and blue and yellow and purple and everything else. But like I say, I was very fortunate and had a very mild bite, but I know a lot of folks who've been bitten by rattlesnakes can have a very rough go of it and have a long recovery time. Anyway, you can see the 2 home ranges are about the same size from one year to the other, but you can clearly the snake shifted his home range a little bit to the west there in 2003. So they can expand their range and kind of shift their home ranges a little bit, although again, they're fairly small home ranges for a snake of that size. Okay, doing the radio telemetry, I spent a lot of time out there, thousands of locations, going out and finding these rattlesnakes. And you can see almost half of the time those rattlesnakes were down inside a midden. And these radio telemetry observations are during daylight hours. So during the summer, especially once you get after about 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, those snakes are down underground and in a midden trying to stay relatively cool compared to the outside temperature. You can look down there, about 38% of the time they were under the canopy of woody vegetation. And in many cases, you'd have a mesquite tree, a large mesquite tree. You may have some other woody species of brush underneath that mesquite tree. Typically, those snakes would be at the drip line or the outer edge of that mesquite tree canopy, and they would typically be coiled up, typically covered by maybe a little bit of grass, and they would just be sitting there basically waiting for prey to come by. I called it camo mode because they were extremely difficult to see in that situation. I've got my radio telemetry. I've got the receivers beeping as I'm going in. I can tell that snake, I know where the snake is, but I cannot see him because they're so well camouflaged by that cryptic pattern of their scales. And by the time I zoom in on a rattlesnake, he may be 2 or 3 inches off the toe of my boot. And there's been several cases where I actually wound up stepping on a rattlesnake, but I never had a rattlesnake try and strike me. If I did step on one, on a couple occasions, they didn't even move at all when I stepped on them, but most of the time I stepped on them, they took off. They wanted to get away from me. In all the thousands of locations that I did, that I got, the only time a rattlesnake actually rattled at me is if I caught them exposed in the open, which you can see down there is not very often. The rattlesnake realized he'd been seen. He sensed I was there, and they'd start getting defensive and start to rattle at me. The only other time was occasion I had a female rattlesnake. I knew she was in a shrub clump. I got down on my hands and knees trying to get in there and find her. I could hear a rattling sound. It was about level with my face, and she was actually up in the shrub about 2 or 3 feet off the ground. And she said, "Hey, you're too close, buddy. Back off." So I was more than happy to back off. And occasionally we do find them up in trees. I've seen them up 6, 7, 8 foot up into a tree, although that's very common. Most of the time, this is what they look like. They're sitting there coiled up. They're completely motionless. They're waiting for a small mammal or a bird to light within striking range. But the last thing they want to do is give themselves away, because they view us, as well as most other critters out there, as a potential predator of them. The last thing they want to do is rattle. I know I've heard stories. People say rattlesnakes don't rattle like they used to because of feral hogs. Well, that's not the case. Rattlesnakes don't like rattling, period. That's one of their last defenses to deter predation, is to rattle as a warning to a potential predator. That's the last thing they want to do. They'd prefer to sit like this, let you walk right by them. Those of y'all that spend a lot of time out in the brush and on the prairies in rattlesnake country, I bet you'd be surprised how many rattlesnakes you may walk within inches of or a foot of and never know it, because they're just sitting there laying down there coiled up like that. And the last thing they want to do is give themselves away. And that pretty well wraps it up. And I'd be happy to answer any questions y'all might have.
And Chip, boy, do they ever have some questions. The chat has really been going off.
And hopefully I can answer. Maybe some I may not be able to answer.
You actually were, I think it was like you were reading the chat, answering questions right after people were asking them. That was kind of funny for a little while. But on your last slide, if you wouldn't mind, if you could press the back button.
Yep.
A question that came in that I think is really relevant for master naturalists is and maybe it was the other slide where you had the location of sighting for the rattlesnakes. You talk about where rattlesnakes were most prevalent, that one right there.
Okay.
As far as the locations where they were found. Can you talk about what your safety methods are when you are out in the field looking for these location sites, or think through the eyes of a master naturalist as they are typically on trail but might go off trail a little bit, and what kind of safety considerations they want to take?
Clearly just paying attention to your surroundings. I mean, when I was down there in South Texas, I wore snake boots. Boots that came up just below the knee. But like I say, I never had a snake strike at me. All the encounters I had, I never had one strike at me. But again, like I say, most of the time they were around the edge. When they were above ground, they were around the edge of a mesquite tree. So if you're going into a clump of brush, you're probably going into an area where they may more frequently be occurring at any given time during the daylight hours. So, and like I say, they're so well camouflaged that it's hard to see them. So I'd avoid getting down on your hands and knees and climbing under a mesquite tree at 7, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning when they may be coiled up in there, because they're extremely difficult to see. But again, snake boots or snake leggings, if someone wanted to use snake leggings. Clearly, a lot of times they may could be at the hibernacula. I mean, they could be under a rock or some other debris as well. Just be careful if you're turning over debris. Usually use a snake hook or something like that to grab a hold of a log or something to lift it over if you're wanting to look underneath it, just in case there happens to be a snake underneath there. But like I say, snake boots are a great way to protect yourselves. But like I say, in general, they're very docile snakes. But when one gets exposed, when one feels threatened, they can get aggressive. I mean, I hear stories of rattlesnakes attacking people, although I've never had a rattlesnake come after me. I've had a rattlesnake come at me, but the rattlesnake didn't clearly know where I was, and he was trying to get away, and he just happened to come in my general direction. But I've never had one get aggressive and attack me. They're always wanting to get away from me because they see me as a predator.
So that leads into another question, and there's a lot of them coming into chat, y'all. We may not be able to get to all of these questions, so I'm trying to group them into different categories. But Chip, there's been a couple of different questions about the potency of venom in younger or newborn rattlesnakes and their ability or inability to control their venom injectable. If that's a myth, or if there's some backgrounds behind the potency of a rattlesnake based off of its age?
There might be a little bit there. You know, obviously in a younger snake, the venom is probably a little more concentrated in a younger snake. As far as they're being able to control the release of their venom, you know, I'm sure everyone's heard the term a dry bite. You know, they do control it, but a lot of times then they may not be very good at controlling it. You know, I've heard of, you know, people getting struck and the actual snake will release the venom before it actually bites, and they'll get venom all over their pant leg before the snake actually bites them, or the snake will release the venom as it's already bitten somebody and starts to come back away from the bite. So they do have control over it, but sometimes they don't control it very well.
Another question, and Chip, you were asked this question at the annual meeting when you came down to McAllen this fall or last fall, and I can't help but chuckle at how impressed everybody in the room was at your answer to it. So hopefully you can live up to
Okay.
the impression again. But can you tell us about the other species of rattlesnakes in the state of Texas and the distinguishing factor that makes the Western Diamondback so unique?
Yeah, there's pretty much eight recognized other species, eight recognized species of rattlesnake in the state. Obviously, the Western Diamondback is the most common, and it's that scalation on the back of the back that forms that diamondback pattern. You know, and color can vary quite a bit on the Western Diamondbacks. You know, typically they're different shades of browns and yellows, maybe a little gray. You'll get some white flecking in there on the diamond-shaped pattern. Occasionally, you'll find one that'll have kind of a reddish hue to the snake as well. So the color can vary a little bit. Let me go back to that. I think that next slide that kind of shows the you know, good typical pattern of a Western Diamondback rattlesnake. And a lot of folks, just to make something just kind of popped into my brain, is shininess. A lot of snakes that have smooth scales, they kind of have a shiny appearance, which makes them a little more noticeable in the wild. Again, rattlesnakes, if you can see on the slide there, the top of the scales have keels on them on the Western Diamondback rattlesnakes, which kind of reduces that shineability, to use a better lack of a term, which again helps them blend in more with their environment. Other species, you get out in the Trans-Pecos, you have the Mojave rattlesnake, which its pattern looks very similar to the Western Diamondback rattlesnake. Most of your rattlesnakes, the venom is a hemotoxin, which means it damages the blood cells, is the primary effect of it. The Mojave rattlesnake, it has a higher percentage of its venom as a neurotoxin, which affects the neurological system of its prey, or a person, if a person gets bitten by it, similar to a coral snake. Most of their venom is a neurotoxin. And so Mojave rattlesnakes tend to be a little bit more dangerous from a venom standpoint, but they're pretty much restricted to the far West Texas, Big Bend country out in there, and their color pattern is very similar to a Western Diamondback. They may be a little bit lighter in color overall. Also in West Texas, the Trans-Pecos, the Big Bend country probably has our greatest diversity of rattlesnakes. Out there, you've also got the black-tailed rattlesnake, which I think is one of the most attractive rattlesnakes we've got. Its pattern, it's got some kind of light green coloration and blacks and browns in its pattern. The tail, instead of the coon stripe type tail of a western diamondback rattlesnake, black-tailed rattlesnake's tail is black. It gives it its name. Can be locally common out in the mountains of far west Texas, and it actually extends over into parts of the hill country, maybe over as far east as Kerr County, Bandera County. They're not very common in the hill country, but they do occur there. Another species in the that's primarily in the Trans-Pecos is the mottled rock rattlesnake. Again, another very colorful, pretty snake. It's a fairly small snake. They typically don't get much more than a couple feet in size. But their color patterns can be quite striking. Lots of reds and pinks and grays in their color pattern. And they have another, there had been some debate whether they're separate species, but they pretty much determined they're the same species, just a different subspecies of one another. Is the banded rock rattlesnake, which again is restricted to a couple mountain ranges, a few mountain ranges out in far west Texas. Tends to have a grayer pattern, tends to have a fairly dark colored band going around the body as you go down the body. And again, it's only found in a few mountain ranges out in far west Texas. Mottled rock rattlesnake, again, mostly in the Trans-Pecos, but again, they also extend into the western and even central hill country, again, about as far east as Kerr, Bandera County, in that part of the world. Then in the western, probably 2/3 of the state, you have the prairie rattlesnake, which is probably the most widespread rattlesnake in North America. It's found over the entire American West, from southern Canada down into northern Mexico. Very common in the can be very common in the Panhandle, up in the high plains. You think of prairie dog towns. Again, those rattlesnakes use those burrows of prairie dogs for hibernacula and to get out of the midday sun up in the Panhandle, where prairie rattlesnakes can be very common. Kind of a similar pattern to diamond rattlesnake. The pattern on the back, instead of being kind of diamond shaped, tends to be a little bit more oval in pattern. The tails tend to be the same color pattern, the grayish, gray, different shades of gray and yellowish hues to it, as the body on a prairie rattlesnake. But they can be very common, especially up on the high plains. But again, found in the rolling plains and the Trans-Pecos as well. You come over into East Texas, you have the timber rattlesnake, and timber rattlesnake found primarily in East Texas, and you typically have get down on the coast. Timber rattlesnakes are generally referred to as a canebrake rattlesnake. A lot of folks, I think back in the day, they probably thought they were separate species, but they're considered the same species, just a color variation. Again, you got patterns in northeast Texas. The timber rattlesnakes tend to be different shades of brown and yellow type hues. You get down the canebrakes down along the coast, you may pick up a little pink in some of the background patterns down there. They tend to be a little more colorful down on the coast, but still all considered the same species. All of those rattlesnakes are in the genus Crotalus. Crotalus atrox is the scientific name for the western diamondback rattlesnake. And you have two other rattlesnakes that are a different genus, Cicerus, which is the Massasauga rattlesnake. You have two subspecies of them. You have the western Massasauga and the desert Massasauga. Fairly small rattlesnakes up in my part of the world. The western Massasauga can be very common in sand sagebrush grasslands. A lot of the local folks refer to them as sand rattlers. Again, a fairly small rattlesnake. They're not getting much more than about 18, 20 inches in length. Again, different shades of grays and browns in their color pattern. Very small rattles on them. It's very hard to even hear. When they're rattling, it's hard to hear them rattling just because their rattle is so small. But they're found primarily, they got some down on the coast, but they're probably more common up in northwest Texas, into the Trans-Pecos. There's another population down in far south Texas. And then for folks in East Texas, the eastern third of the state, you have the pygmy rattlesnake, which is closely related to the western Massasauga, same genera. Again, very small, diminutive rattlesnake. It can be a very colorful rattlesnake. with grays, pinks, and yellows in their hue, kind of a darker spotted pattern going down the back, but very, very small, and a very small rattle on them, and they're pretty much restricted to the piney woods of East Texas and some of the post oak savanna.
See, y'all, I told you that was impressive. You just as much. You did just as much with that answer as you did in October. And I guess, Chip, out of curiosity, that coloration difference, is that from some soil coloration influence? I'm thinking I live here in kind of some red dirt country. Is there studies that say where those coloration changes or nuances come in?
I don't really know. There's a lot of species of reptiles that do tend to, over time, have evolved to match their soil color. Like horn lizards are a good example. You get down on the coast, you get the grayer soils. Horn lizards tend to have more grayish coloration. Up in my part of the world, more of a reddish color soil, and the horn lizards a little bit more reddish in coloration. So that may have something to do with it. And some of it may just be maybe genetics.
Okay. We've got a few more questions coming in, but I'm gonna probably let you go with this one last question if you're all right sticking around.
Yeah, I'm saying I'm as free as long as you want me. I'll sit here and answer questions as long as you want me to.
Well, Jack asked a great question that I think also answers some other people's questions that have come in. He asked about if any of those rattlesnake species that you just mentioned are protected and or species of greatest conservation need. And then I would add into that question, if there are species that are of concern, what are the biggest threats that you see in your work for those populations?
I'm not completely versed on all the protections for the different species in the state. I do know the prairie rattlesnake is protected here in the state. It is illegal to kill a prairie rattlesnake. I'm sorry, timber rattlesnake. I'm sorry, timber rattlesnakes are protected. They're found in the eastern part of the state. And of course, timber rattlesnakes range from Texas all the way throughout the southeast, all the way up into New England and parts of southern Canada. And their populations have declined region wide. Some of it's persecution, but a lot of it's just simply habitat loss. Where timber rattlesnakes exist is where most of the people in the United States live. But they are protected here in the state. That's the only one I know of off the top of my head that I know is protected here in the state. Massasauga rattlesnakes can be a species of concern, especially in more eastern populations. I mean, they have populations up in Illinois, Missouri, places like that. They've decreased significantly. I don't know. Like I say, here where I'm at the Matador WMA, the Western Massasauga is fairly common, and we've done research and telemetry work on the Massasaugas here on the Matador WMA as well. And we've also been looking at some work trying to tease out the subspecies between Western Massasaugas and desert Massasaugas, which are found a little further to the west. But they are a species of concern, especially in the eastern part of the range. Most of the other rattlesnakes are fairly common, can be locally common in the state. Obviously, Western diamondback rattlesnake is a very wide-ranging rattlesnake. And again, the prairie rattlesnake has an extremely large range throughout North America.
So on that same thread of ranges, you mentioned the slight overlap in your male ranges, your in your slide that you had where you had the two different polygons and the overlap of the female range within the male ranges. Is that similar to those kind of territorial mammalian predators where they create an established male communal range, or do they? How do they? I guess how do Western diamondback rattlesnakes set their ranges?
I'm sure there's territoriality in them. I mean, everyone is familiar with, if they haven't been fortunate enough to actually see it in person, have seen lots of videos the mating dance or the combat dance, however you want to call it. Like I say, again, it's two males basically competing over a female. So they will set up territorial ranges. Most of our snakes, we had a little overlap with male snakes, but not a tremendous amount of overlap. And it was really hard to tease out what our rattlesnake density was there at the Chaparral WMA. Clearly, we've got there's a lot of rattlesnakes at the Chaparral WMA. We did have overlap. You may have multiple females within the range of within the home range of a male rattlesnake as well. But they are going to be to a degree somewhat territorial.
And then I've got one last question to round out the hour, and it's kind of a fun one. You talked about rattlesnake number 9 not being your friend.
Okay. He's still a buddy. He's still a buddy. We had a little disagreement that one day, but he's still a buddy.
You just woke him up on the wrong side of the bed that morning.
That's exactly right.
Sue, earlier in the chat, a question that caught my eye. Sue asked about any instances where you recovered microchips or radio tags within the belly of predators, or if there are other stories that you had of recovery of some of your research material where you did not expect to find it.
Not necessarily in rattlesnakes. Like I say, I witnessed indigo snakes eating rattlesnakes on multiple occasions. I actually watched a big indigo snake. Again, it was a thlimetered snake, so I knew where the snake was. I was following him around, actually hunting a big diamondback rattlesnake. I actually saw the rattlesnake and the indigo snake separately and watched them kind of interact as that indigo snake was trying to locate that rattlesnake to eat them. And I encountered that in many on several occasions. As far as the pit tags, down there at the Chaparral WMA, we marked rattlesnakes with pit tags. We marked horn lizards with pit tags, and we marked Texas tortoises, some Texas tortoises with pit tags. But mostly it was horn lizards and western diamondback rattlesnakes. And kind of one of probably the most unusual things on a pit tag recovery was Texas tortoises they're scativorous. They eat vegetation, forbs, prickly paratunas, but they'll also eat animal scat in the road, coyote droppings, etc. Trying to get minerals and nutrients out of those scats. And we had a researcher down there that was X-raying Texas tortoises to look at clutch size of the eggs in the X-ray. And unfortunately, we didn't notice it until we'd released the tortoise. So we got to looking at the X-ray, and there was actually a pit tag in the digestive tract of the Texas tortoise. And we made the assumption that a coyote, possibly a coyote, had killed and eaten a Texas horn lizard, defecated out the pit tag, and then the Texas tortoise actually was eating on that scat and actually consumed the pit tag that had originally been put in a Texas horn lizard.
And that's a great note to leave it on for everybody to go get lunch.
All right, I apologize for the problems at the beginning there. Like I say, going off of 2 different screens, it just wasn't jiving with me, but we got it.
Oh no, you did great, and you had a huge army of master naturalists rooting for you to be able to accomplish that. So you did great. Oh man. Chip, I can't thank you enough for being our TMN Tuesday presenter. I think this gives our master naturalist that additional knowledge, but that additional glory in being able to put on their Western Diamondback Rattlesnake recertification pin in 2024. So looking forward to seeing lots of those pins at our upcoming annual meeting this October. And across the state, we'll have lots of rattlesnake representation on Master Naturalist this year. So with that, thank you, Chip, again. And I'm going to stop the recording and grab the chat. But for everybody else, we'll have this recording on our website, if not this afternoon, first thing tomorrow. And we really appreciate you coming back and sharing your passion and your knowledge with us, Chip.
You bet. Anytime. I enjoyed it.